The US military has a history of creating some of the best performing tanks in the world, in which they have stayed in service for a very long period of time. One example of this happens to be the M60 series, successor of the M48 Patton III, and under the Abrams. Unofficially titled the M60 Patton IV, the M60 is a 48-ton main battle tank developed by the United States and currently stays in use by countries like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Thailand, Morocco, and Greece. The M60 stayed in service from March 1959 to 1991 after the Gulf War. In a short summary, I'll be explaining the history of the M60, its many variants, and how it came to be, and across the globe. To get a full understanding behind the doctrine in which the M60 was developed under, you have to start in roughly 1944. The German Wehrmachts were fielding heavily armored tanks, and the Soviets had large stockpiles of T-34-85s. And this is the birth of the main battle tank idea. With the British Centurion, tanks were no longer just used as infantry fire support, but what was learned from the Germans was used combined arms tactics that would combine firepower, mobility, and armor all at once. And so we have ended the war with the M26 Pershing. The Pershing was meant to fill the role that was shown to work with the Soviets and the Germans. The Pershing had mixed reception, being used mainly as a morale tool against German heavies, but not amazing in practice. It wasn't proven to be what it filled in to be, and so they had handed over the job to a new tank, the M46 Patton I. From 1949 to 1951, military used the Patton to fight in Korea, and just like its predecessor, it had mixed reactions to it. The M46 is arguably the best American tank to be used in the Korean War, being able to withstand hits from the Chinese T-34-85s and other armored units utilized by China and North Korea. Not only that, but being able to wipe them off with not much of a problem using its 9mm gun, but for mechanics it was a nightmare. The reliability was debated, and although it seemed as if it was the next generation of tanks, it wasn't. It was mainly a stopgap vehicle, and didn't see very much time in service compared to other vehicles. And so the Patton family lived on. The next Patton, being the M47 Patton II, is being built as an emergency to respond to the Korean War. Using a 90mm cannon, just like the last two tanks it was being replacing, the turret was used as a new design, the T-42 turret. Developed at the Detroit Arsenal, this was meant to counter the new threat of Soviet tanks such as the T-54. The Army originally wanted to use the T-42, a prototype with a promising design choice. Although it was cut short by the final M47. The M47 was used to fill the role of a modern tank that the Army simply didn't have at the time, and while the M48 was also being designed. Because of this rush, they had put the new T-42 turrets onto the M46 hull, which was tried and used during the war and proved successful. And just as we can infer, the new tanks create a pattern, all use a 90mm gun, slower drive, and were all built to fight Soviet engineering. Doctrine laid out a heavy inspiration on these tanks, and that is what now led to the T-48, a prototype to test a new four-man crew idea and improve engine and transmission drives. Along with this was a new philosophy on armor. The new elliptical design showed the cast hull and turret. The cast armor was proven to be more durable in comparison to older models, and led to the creation of the M48 Patton III. Now, I could make a whole video talking about the M48 and T-48, but this will be a shorter summary of the series that led to the M60. In final production, the M48 was built, had the same 90mm cannon, improved engine and transmission, and the new armor. The M48 saw extended service. It was simple, could withstand hits from its Soviet counterparts, be able to fill the tank role of infantry support and armor-on-armor engagements. This was to counter the mass-producing potential of the Soviet Union, and be able to counter their armor comparably. Because of Soviet doctrine of one tank being able to do it all, they started to lean more into the idea that a tank crew needs to be able to see them first. In which we involved our fire control systems, optics, ballistic computers, etc. Now the M48 was successful, proving to be able to counter such threats, but it simply wasn't enough going into the Army. Now the M60 didn't start from one clean improved prototype, it started with a number of them, branching from the M48 idea. Introducing the T-95 main battle tank. Starting with the T-95 primarily, it was built by TriStar Defense and Army Ordnance. It was a simple testbed, had a similar hull to the later built M60, but not entirely, while keeping the same armament as the M48. Then there was the T-95E1, the realization was that to fight the Soviets' armor, they would need to be able to have a much more suitable gun. T-95E1 was the first tank to field the APFSDS, armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot, and it kept the T-95 whole, while having a turret more angled and sloped. In summary, the T-95 family tried composite armor ideas, new fire control, ammo, and new rounds. These failed because of accuracy issues, logistical failures, and it just wasn't ready. T-95 was supposed to be the future of tanks, but it was too advanced even for its own time. Its ideas were simplified into something more practical, and that's what became the M60. Now it moves to the XM60, built from 1957 to 1960. It used the British L7 105mm cannon, redesignated to the M60A2. It utilized a diesel engine for range and survivability as well. This is a direct evolution from the M48 instead of a prototype branch. This is how American tanks changed. It changed the cast hull to a sharper edged one to avoid the extra weight and be more effective in the process. It ended the line of 90mm cannons and would opted to have the 105mm, which would have stayed in service even with the early Abrams variants. Why this was important is because it could accurately hit and destroy Soviet T-54s and T-55s at long ranges. Unlike Soviet tanks, its armor philosophy was do not be hit first, but you can get the first shot off. Now by 1960, the M60 is a final product. The M60 is made primarily by TriSo Defense, and it features the 105mm gun, 4-man crew, and multiple coax machine guns such as a 7.62 and a 50 cal. The early M60 series had the M48 style turret in a way, and used homogeneous armor plus the cast armor from the M48. It had a slightly lower profile, but not Soviet low profile, but low enough in US standards. It was capable of firing armor-piercing discarding sabots, not to be confused with APFSDS, and high-explosive anti-tank. Its fire control consisted of a coincidence rangefinder, basic stabilization, not perfect but optimal enough. As a result of this, it had better chance of hitting before it was hit first. The engine was the Continental AVDS 1790 diesel engine. The vehicle in operational condition was capable of going about 30 miles per hour, and in kilometers that's 48. It didn't face any combat, but it was deployed in NATO movements in 1960 from 1962. Getting deployed to West Germany, and was meant to potentially fight the armored threat over the Iron Curtain. Overall, the early M60 prioritized survivability, seeing the enemy first, and being globally accepted to fight in any terrain. But it simply wasn't enough, even then. And that's where in 1962 the M60A1 AOS arrived. A scheduled upgrade by TriSo Defense, the reasoning behind the new upgrade is because the original M60 turret wasn't as optimal as thought for protection, and it was cramped even for the people crewing it. It would have stayed if it wasn't for the creation of tanks like the T-62 that had bigger guns, armor, potentially could be a threat to the M60s. The change that ended up happening was the completely revised new turret, the needle-nose turret design, that would offer a more armor distribution, like the upper front plate on the Abrams. It would have focused on deflecting rounds than having enough armor to withstand them. This would keep the M60 light while offering more protection. The fire control system stayed relatively the same on the AO1 AOS, and it wasn't until the Rise Passive when it got improved sight systems. Nothing else changed in the AO1 AOS due to nothing needing change. Unlike its earlier model, the M60A1 did have to participate in multiple wars early on, such as the Yom Kippur War in 1973 and the Vietnam War in the 60s and 70s. The Vietnam War was one of the first times the M60 as a whole saw combat against the North Vietnamese. Tanks were rarely used by Vietnam, and it led to the M61 being tank on terrain or tank on guerrilla warfare. Its 105 did no shortage of destruction. It proved reliable in destroying bunkers, positions, and other related structures. A direct quote from a crewman goes, "If something wasn't in front of us, it usually wasn't after we fired." It was amazing at clearing positions, crushing the morale of the enemy, and clearing true lines. But it did not go without its weaknesses. It was still prone to breaking down in the jungle due to the mud and dense terrain, and was threatened by mines, RPGs, and enemy fire as a whole. The Yom Kippur War was an example of an overconfident force that didn't finally use the M60 to its advantage. The M60 was able to destroy T-55s and T-62s without problem, but it was also rivaled by ATGMs that could hit it at the same time and range as it could have seen them. In Vietnam, the M60A1 was used outside of its intended role, excelling in firepower, but struggling with terrain and ambush threats. In contrast, during the Yom Kippur War, it was employed in conventional armored warfare, where its gun and optics performed well, though it faced new dangers from anti-tank guided missiles. The next variant of the M60 was the M60A2, nicknamed the Starship for being a logistical failure. Developed by TriStar Defense, it is a product of the obsession the government had with missile carriers and gun-launched ATGMs. The idea and concept behind it was being able to fire all rounds, and ATGMs included, influenced by the F-551 Sheridan and other missile carriers. The main gun was the 152mm M162 gun launcher. It fired the MGM-151 Shillelagh missile, heat rounds, HE, and canister rounds for infantry. In reality, the new turret design and the nightmare that was the gun launcher was a terrible idea. The gun launcher was fragile and unreliable, and sometimes could blow up the crew in earlier models. But the fire control system it did have was one of the most advanced at the time, having a laser rangefinder, ballistic computer, missile guidance system, and stabilization improvement. But the giant problem was with the logistics. It was a nightmare to use in the field, and it was because the complexity behind the new system. The new low-profile squish design was to give it more armor with less, and house a new gun launcher. It was designed to reduce silhouette, which as a person who's seen one, it is not low profile at all. Crews needed far more experience and technical knowledge to operate it, and the crew needed to be able to maintain it too. Luckily, the M60A2 never saw combat, and crews hated it. Primarily deployed to NATO movements, and that's all the action it got. And after that came the M60A1 Rise Passive. Rise meaning reliability, improved selected equipment, passive meaning passive night vision. No more using the IR spotlight. It was introduced in the late 1970s on the base platform of the M60A1 AOS. Its purpose was to give it night fighting capabilities, improve its reliability in the field, and better anti-tank weapons. Why it existed was to counter the Soviet T-62s and T-72s. It gave it a true night fighting capability, and it was able to detect and engage before getting hit or revealing its position. The new firepower for anti-tank was the APFSD as it received, the M735 Sabo. It was able to penetrate higher armor tanks and render them destroyed. It got higher penetration, more velocity, and was stabilized by fin instead of spin. It gave it a much higher chance to penetrate a T-62 or a T-72, for example, and one new addition was the explosive reactive armor. Now, unlike what is thought, many early Rise Ps did not automatically get ERA. It was a later feature. How the ERA works is if it was hit, it would explode and react to the heat penetrator and knock it off course and lessen its penetration by more than half. Not only that, but the turret ring was thickened because of lessons learned during the Yom Kippur War. One quote about it was from a crewman that goes, "Once we trusted the passive sights, we preferred moving at night. It felt safer than daylight." Overall, the M60A1 Rise Passive upgraded and modernized the tank through improved reliability, passive night vision systems, and enhanced firepower with increased Sabo ammunition. While retaining its original armor, later upgrades added explosive reactive armor to counter shaped charge threats, transforming the M60A1 into a capable 24-hour combat platform for light cold wire warfare. And now it is 1978. After the success of the M60A1, it is time for a final upgrade, one that would last until another tank replaces the M60. This was the first tank to utilize a thermal imager, the new tank titled the M60A3 TTS. It featured a new thermal sight, better stabilization, and a laser rangefinder. This alone put it miles ahead of its adversaries, and with the new M774 and the M883 armor-piercing shell, it only put it further ahead. They could track and destroy a target at a much farther range than almost any other tank in the world, highlighting its original purpose of shooting first and not being hit at all. Thanks to the Rise improvements, the engine was more reliable, and now it was even more accurate with its new fire control systems. Because for once, the Army didn't break something that wasn't broken. Overall, following the M60A1 rise passive upgrade, the M60A3 was introduced in the late 1970s, incorporating advanced fire control systems, including a laser rangefinder and ballistic computer, while retaining the reliability and night fighting improvements of the rise passive. It significantly increased accuracy and target engagement capability, and representing the most advanced evolution of the M60 series. Now usually this would be the end of the video, but I've decided to put some other variants of the tank and stories from crew members to give more insight while all this was happening. In 1965, following the creation of the M60A1, the Engineer Corps was missing a modernized vehicle to fill the gap that they had, and it became a logistical problem, because they now had to repair and maintain two different series of vehicles. That is where the M728 CEV finds its purpose, the Combat Engineering Vehicle. It was put into service in 1965 and built by Tristar Defense. This was armed with a hydraulic dozer blade and a 165mm demolition gun. This could fire HESH, high explosive squash head, which works similarly to high explosive. It was short-barreled and low velocity, and this was built to give the combat engineers a tank of their own that could operate to fulfill their needs of destroying emplacements, build defensive berms, clear roads, and etc. If something was in the way, it could move it without a problem. What makes it special is that it can operate where others can't, due to it being a tank with engineering equipment. Another variant is the M60T Sabra. The Sabra was built by the Turkish, and the most notable change is the armor, and the removal of the 105 for a 120mm. It exists because how much the M60 family was aging and they needed a modernization. Desperately. They added modular composite armor to the turret and hull, giving it a chance to withstand hits from anti-tank guided missiles and other projectiles. And even more than that was the extra ERA that was added all over it. Its fire control system was given a full modern system with thermals for just about everything. Well, how did the crews that these held feel about the M60 as a whole? Well, luckily we have answers from ex-crew members. One quote from a crewman was about the tank's firepower. It was, "If you saw it first and got the shot off, you expected it to go through," meaning that the tank had a high chance of destroying anything it hit. Second quote from a crewman was about the night fighting capability, and it was, "Night stopped becoming something to avoid, and it became something you could use." What they meant by that was, with the new passive upgrade, a crew would move in the night without a problem, becoming an opportunity instead of something to fear. The tank had a very positive reception from the crews, and overall, it met the Army's requirements and needs for a new tank. It helped show what was needed for the Abrams in the future. Now, if you knew anything about the M60, you'd be asking why I haven't mentioned the Gulf War. This is because, in my opinion, it went so well that it needs its own portion of the video. To begin, the M60 was used in Kuwait during the Gulf War by primarily the US Marine Corps. Over the course of the Gulf War, the M60 had over 100 confirmed kills of enemy armor, while only losing one to a mine. By now, the M60s the Marines were given had the M833 Sabo, made out of the depleted uranium. But more importantly, had it destroyed its rival, the T-72. On February 26, 1991, at the Kuwaiti International Airport, the 1st Marine Division pushed through a dense blackout, caused by burning oil and smoke everywhere. Marines were closing in on the airport and stumbled across the Iraqi 3rd Armored Division, which held T-72s because of the smoke. They literally couldn't see the M60 charging on, but with thermal sights of the M60s, they could see them clear as day. And at over 2,000 meters, they commenced fire, picking off multiple T-72s without losing not one M60 in the process. One of those shots was by the M60A1 Rise Passive Genesis. It shot through the upper front plate and out the back of the engine, and passed clean through, leaving the round to be stopped by a sand berm in the back. If you like more videos like these, I'd love to hear your ideas in the comment section, and make sure to subscribe if you liked what you see. And Speed and Power out.